Welcome back. Hope you found that host profiles lab interesting. What we'll do is take a look at another centralized point of management. This is centrally managing our VM images with a mechanism that's called content libraries. In this lesson, we'll explain the purpose of content libraries in vSphere. We'll identify vSphere requirements for content libraries, create a local content library, subscribe to a published content library, and deploy VMs from a content library. So what are content libraries? Content libraries, like I said, it's a way to centrally manage your VM images so that you have a consistent imaging mechanism, not just in a single vSphere environment, but across multiple vSphere environments. If you have multiple vCenter servers, maybe distributed around the world, you can create a global standard of VM image formats. This would include VM templates, as well as OVF templates. It could also include ISO images, even just powered off virtual machines that you might want to use as a source to clone for VMs into other vCenter systems. So you have this concept of a central library in a sense that can then be published. That library is then made available for remote vCenter servers to subscribe to. So you'll see we'll have a couple different types of content libraries. There is the concept of a local library, which is essentially where all the source images are located. You can then publish that library. Once that's done, then other vCenter servers can subscribe to that library. And then a synchronization schedule can be implemented. You don't have to have this as an automated synchronization. You can leave it manual, but it will also save on space because it will hold the source images and the original local library. The subscriber libraries are basically only holding the metadata about those images to save space on the subscribed libraries. They'll only download the actual true content when you have it, when you need to actually deploy a machine from that actual vCenter system. Now, there's actually a mechanism now in vSphere 7 that lets us set up not just a subscription from the subscriber library to the original local library, but a two-way subscription is now possible. We'll see you do that in the lab, where the actual local library will then subscribe to the subscriber library in a sense to establish a two-way synchronization channel here. The content libraries include this powerful publish and subscribe features. And as we said, content libraries are stored in the vSphere data stores. Well, actually, just one thing to note, where do you keep these content libraries? Content libraries are stored in a choice that admins can select from. Admins can either store their content libraries on the vCenter server's own local file systems, usually done through a file share, or you can store the libraries on a data store accessed through an ESXi host. That's a part of the vCenter server's inventory. And there's actually benefits to each one of these. We'll take a look. But the content library benefits: you have simple management and sharing of templates and other file types from a central library perspective published to your remote libraries. You get consistent content between your different multiple sites, consistent file security between multiple sites. Now in vSphere 7, you can actually have encrypted VMs being part of the content library. You have efficient use of content storage, since the subscriber libraries are actually going to only hold the metadata initially until they actually try to deploy a machine. From their end, they will then have to download the entire item to their actual library. And synchronization between local and remote vCenter instances can be scheduled, can be done on demand. And there's also synchronization between vCenter server and vCloud Director. That is another option, since you have the ability to have the same kind of concept, having a published library in vCloud Director, and vCenter Server can subscribe to it. Now, like I already mentioned, there are a couple different content library types. There's the concept of a local library, a published library, an optimized published library, and subscribed library. What are all the differences here? Well, a local library is basically content that is controlled by the administrator. That is where you put all of the source of all of your images go into this local library. Now, that's local to the vCenter server that you created the first library onto. That vCenter server might have multiple data centers. Well, you still just use that one local library for all of your data center servers. You'll essentially have the library stored probably on an ESX server data store. so that the ESX server who's got the data store associated can then start the actual provisioning of the machine from this vCenter data center to maybe other ESX servers that are in other data centers, all part of the same vCenter server. So if you've got one vCenter server, you can place everything into a content library to have central location of all of your different images, even though you might have multiple data centers. But if you want this to be shared with another vCenter server altogether, then the local library can be published. Publishing a local library simply means it is able to be subscribed to by a remote vCenter server. Now, there's also an option called Optimized Publish. That's a bit different than the publish. The published local library is a library that can be optimized, can be synchronized on a schedule with individual components. Where the optimized published library, this is a library that is it's been published to ensure lower CPUs and is faster provisioning over HTTP streaming. Where this is most useful is if your multiple vCenter servers are not in enhanced link mode. They will have to have the content streamed from the local library. A subscribe library, on the other hand, is the actual remote vCenter server who is then subscribing back to the original local library and has that synchronization based on a schedule. It normally does this at 11:59 p.m. every night, but you can adjust that schedule. So where is the content adjustable? Well, basically the subscriber library is reading information from the local library as the local library presents it. So the only content that can be changed is the actual local library. That is only changeable if it's a local library with its normal published configuration. The optimized published library, on the other hand, is actually a copy of your original local library, and it's in a read-only fashion. So the library that can be updated is the original local library. If it's just published, it can still be updated. But as far as a subscribed content library, that content cannot be changed. It's basically pulling information from the original local library. And you cannot also publish a subscribed library. It's basically a single central library with the remote libraries like as a hub and spoke type of configuration. So where do you store your content library is an interesting question. Should you store your local library on a folder that your vCenter server can see, usually through some kind of file share, like an NFS share, for instance? Or should you store the library on an ESX server local data store, or just a data store that's connected to an ESXi host? Well, it all depends on where you're trying to, purpose the benefits of one versus the other. When the library is actually stored in vCenter on a file system that vCenter can access, this optimizes the synchronization because the synchronization is really between the two different vCenter servers. If you store the library, on the other hand, on a data store, the ESX server is accessing the contents. And if you would like to have this synchronized, it actually can be synchronized between the ESXi servers. This tends to be a bit more efficient. It also makes provisioning machines a little bit simpler because who's doing the provisioning in the first place? It's the ESX server. So if a content library is a data store, the ESX server that can see that data store can provision a VM right from the files that are on that data store, as opposed to having to pull them from a vCenter server file. So factors can impact your overall performance here. The type of data path, whether you have direct connection or streaming. And of course, if it's a streaming mechanism, you'll be selecting the published library that's been optimized for streaming purposes. Your network capacity, of course, data compression or decompression can impact this, and also whether or not there's encryption involved because of the overhead involved with that. So let's take a look at creating a content library. Basically, you on the vCenter server where you would like to host all of the source images, you select that you would like to create a content library right off of the menu, and select you create a content library, specify that it's going to be local. And if you would like to enable it for publishing at this point in time, you certainly can. You can always enable publishing after the fact. But when you create a content library that's a local library, you're basically ready to then start placing VM templates or OVF templates or any other types of files you would like to be part of the synchronization into this content library. Some advanced settings are available too. You can adjust the auto sync frequencies, and you can also set your performance optimizations, all kinds of different parameters. What I like is that the advanced configuration is actually right off of that content library's main configurations page. So we take a quick look at the original setup. We'll take a quick break. We'll look at more options and also setting up the subscriber library right after our break. We'll see you in a few minutes.